That was a shining introduction. Jared, how do you feel about being here now?
So when I left this morning, my wife was in bed and she's, where are you going? And I said, I have to go do this Q&A. And she's like, what time is it? And I said, it's 7:15. She's like, why would anyone wake up at 7:15 to come and hear you talk? So I think it's kind of appropriate with Malcolm's intro, but that's okay. I appreciate all of you guys showing up. You can act like you're having a good time. I'll tell my wife you guys all had a great time, and then I'll get off to a good start with her today.
So we'll start off. I'll give you a little different introduction. I want everyone to know, last night I asked Jared for some bullet points on his background. Now, we know each other pretty well at this point, but how'd you get here, right? Tell me a little bit about that. I get 4 bullet points. From Dallas, okay, USC, so he went to USC, South African parents, and likes sports.
So what happened there was a mirror in our house that had tipped over and shattered about 2 minutes before he sent the text.
Oh, good. Okay.
And I was trying to deal with a hysterical member of our house. I don't want to throw my wife under the bus, but my wife might have been hysterical, worried about our dog, worried about the mirror, but not at all worried about the fact that the mirror was right next to me and I might have been stepping in glass. But she had to make sure. We have a little 10-pound dachshund poodle named Cooper, and it was made abundantly clear when I met my wife that I was never going to be the most important person in her life, and I get reminded of that on a regular basis.
That's why we get along so well. Well, okay, so let's talk business. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are.
So from Dallas, grew up, born and raised here. I'm actually the only person in my family born in America. My brothers, my parents are from South Africa. My family moved here in, I think it was 1979, and then I was born about 10 years later. And grew up, I hadn't lived anywhere else, went to college in California. It was around that time I realized I wasn't going to be able to play sports for a living. I'm only 6'4", so it didn't really work out. I wasn't tall enough. I did play, I played sports all through high school, and that certainly influenced, my experiences as a broadcaster, and I was fortunate to be a part of the baseball program at USC. Technically, I was an undergraduate assistant coach because the NCAA forces you to have wacky titles. I did very little coaching, helped a lot with operations, logistics, recruiting, stuff like that. It was a great experience. And then I was shipped off to Great Falls, Montana. I did the very typical, go to a small town and work your way up thing. Great Falls is it's about as minor league of a city as there is. They're Perkins. It was I went on a date with a girl named Courtney there, and we went to Perkins. That was the really nice restaurant. There were, I think, 3 stoplights in Great Falls, Montana, and I lived in an apartment complex in which a crystal meth ring existed and was busted at 3 a.m. in the middle of July. So wasn't really eager to go back for a second season, and I was fortunate to get a job in Michigan working for ESPN. Did that for a little over 2 years, and then I worked my way back here, and I've been with the Rangers in some capacity since 2014, and have been able to do other things like broadcast for the Legends and be a part of some other cool teams, organizations, experiences.
So let's talk a little bit more about your family being from South Africa. That you have a unique perspective because of that. How do you think that's influenced your path?
Well, a lot, and I don't know that I realized it until I was older. So when I had friends that would go and hang out with cousins or grandparents, that was really foreign to me because my cousins and grandparents were all in South Africa. So I never had those relationships. My best friend is really close to his cousin, and growing up, it was just wow, you're going to, I don't have a cousin. My cousins are they're asleep right now. They're in a different time zone, different continent. But my family grew up in a really interesting time in South Africa. Unfortunately, it's not the best country in a lot of different measures. The way that they treat one another still to this day is probably not where anyone would like it to be. Obviously, a lot of you all, I'm sure, are familiar with apartheid and all the terrible stuff that went down. But I think that was the biggest thing. I didn't realize it until I was older. And it's been amplified over the last few months. I'm white, and obviously my family is too. And unfortunately, growing up in South Africa, a lot of white people they grew up in environments where they were taught that white people were the best. And I don't know how. My grandfather, unfortunately, my dad's dad is not alive. Otherwise, I probably would have had this conversation with him over the last few months. But it wasn't just encouraged. It was required that we, growing up, treated people equally. And I think it was my dad. It's a longer story, but at one point at work, my dad was called into the office because he hadn't been performing well. And this is just a horrible story about South Africa, but basically, because he hadn't been performing well at his silly, meaningless job, relatively speaking, his boss slid a gun across the table. They opened a door, like a closet door, and there was a black man tied up, hands behind his back, blindfolded, and they said, shoot him. Otherwise, we're not sure if you're loyal to this company. We need you to prove your loyalty. My dad walked away, and he said that as he walked down the hall, he refused to do it. He was sure that there was going to be a bullet in the back of his head. And there wasn't, and that's ultimately what led my family to leave South Africa. My dad immediately started putting plans in place to get out of there. And thankfully, because of his dad, he was not raised to believe what the majority belief was in South Africa. So, I think there are probably a ton of influences. I used to say the word garage instead of garage, Tuesday instead of Tuesday, tomato instead of tomato. I didn't learn some of these things till I was 8 and got made fun of. But the biggest thing is definitely because of the lack of equality in South Africa, and how grateful I am that was just not something either my parents and their families believed in. That's been something that's been beaten into me and my brothers from a really young age, and that's probably the best gift that my dad and my mom probably to this day have given me.
For sure. And now we also know the adversity that you've overcome to be a broadcaster in the weird way that you talked. You had to just get past that.
I've overcome a lot.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. You've been in baseball, you were there, you guys are full swing, and suddenly it's not anymore. Talk about the influence or the impact that you've seen that have on both the players, but also on the front office staff, the broadcasters, all around.
Yeah, it's tough. It was, so my wife's high risk, and so I was not eager to get back into the world when this all first started. But, you'd hear people share opinions like, oh, baseball should play or that shouldn't play, or the NBA should or shouldn't play. And this, those conversations maybe on the surface appear to be simple, binary, yes or no type decisions. But then you realize that a no decision impacts so many people. I was conflicted during this time, because I knew that if the Rangers or if baseball didn't have a season, and baseball, especially because unlike the NBA and the NHL and the G League, baseball hadn't had a season at all. The NBA, the G League, the NHL had at least played 75% of their season. They were able to generate some revenue, and hopefully that would be able to sustain for a period of time. Baseball wasn't in that boat, and no season meant the loss of a lot of jobs, and maybe mine. I don't know. I was very fortunate to not have lost my job or be furloughed, but that very easily could have changed. But so that was tough. It was tough knowing that maybe the smart decision, for the larger population was still going to have such a negative impact on so many. Thankfully, baseball is able to not only have a season, but get to the point where we are today, where the World Series is going to start tonight. No fans was very weird. I don't know, even like when I go to my nephew's sporting events, their parents, there might be 50 or 20 or whatever, but I mean, we had no fans in this huge cavernous ballpark. It was a very odd feeling. And I know for the players, and really this is probably everyone, broadcasting baseball is a ton of fun for me. For them, playing baseball is a ton of fun. At the end of the day, they're still getting to play a game, but you realize how important the human side of it is. For instance, for the broadcasters, we went in a specific entrance and we were basically ushered to an elevator, and then we had to go right to our booth, and that was it. I actually didn't even see my broadcast partners, Eric Nadel and Matt Hicks. We weren't even in the same rooms. So I would see them when I arrived. We would have a socially distanced pregame meal, and then I wouldn't see them until we walked back to our cars after the game. The players were encouraged to not spend any additional time at the ballpark. So a lot of times, they'll show up at 12, 1 o'clock for a 7 o'clock game. They'll hang out, they'll play cards, they'll, their little, whatever, not the little video game PS switches or whatever, they all, they play that. They do all these things together that isn't baseball intensive, but they weren't really allowed to do that. On the road trips, you basically stay in your hotel room. You're allowed to go for a walk. But like all the human interaction, the camaraderie pieces, the just simple conversations with an usher or the security guard that you're used to seeing, that wasn't a part of it. And it was a really, really odd experience. But at the end of the day, just the ability to get through the season was really influential for a lot of people in their ability to have a job. And so that's probably the prevailing reward from getting to where we are now.
That also seems like it would have an impact on the chemistry, both within the team, but also with you guys, even as a staff, as broadcasters. Did you see that impact in the chemistry?
Yeah, I think we're lucky. We've been together now as a group of 3 for 5 years. And so it was probably a little easier for us than maybe a newer broadcast team.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so much of our chemistry is, the ability to look and see when someone is about to talk, or just by looking at you, that maybe I've got something to say, and that wasn't, we probably stepped on each other's toes a little more than usual. And then the players, the Rangers had a bunch of new faces. They had a lot of young players come up. They had, this offseason, I think they're 20. They started the season with 30 men on their roster, as opposed to 26, which is what it would have been. And of the 30, I think 14 of them were either new to the organization or had less than 1 year in the big leagues. So I don't think that's necessarily the reason why the Rangers' record was what it was. I think there are probably other reasons in play. But
we won't talk about that.
What's that?
We won't talk about that.
Oh, yeah. They were in first place at one point, I think like 20 games in. Unfortunately, the season was 60 games. Yeah, but that definitely plays a role. I think chemistry it's not quantifiable, so it's tougher to it's in one of those intangible things you can't really speak about objectively. But I do think it plays a role. But all teams dealt with this. It was one of those years where I think a lot of players, again, will tell you, yeah, there's a baseline of fun that comes with playing baseball and getting paid a lot of money to do it. But relative to other seasons, even teams like the Dodgers and the Rays, who are still fighting for the World Series, they would probably tell you that there were so many elements of this season that just weren't fun. And it was a lot tougher for all of these guys to get through, especially on the road, because they really were trapped in their hotel rooms. Granted, they're nice hotels, but hotel room life, 12, 14 hours a day probably isn't that enjoyable, especially when you're doing it 33, 36 nights over a 2.5-month stretch.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of kind of the toughness aspect, you're on a microphone and generally feeding off of the energy of the fans. So how did you continue to bring the energy without that?
Well, that was tough. They pumped in, I'm sure, whether you've seen hockey or the NBA or baseball, they pump in sound. Sometimes it was only for the broadcast and the players wouldn't hear it. Like I think in the NBA, my understanding in the bubble was the players couldn't hear the pumped in sound. Baseball, they could. So in the 8th inning with the bases loaded in a big moment in a 1-run game, there was some atmosphere, and you tried to build off of that, but it's just not the same, and where it was really awkward was, in between pitches when there's usually that murmur that comes with 30,000 people being there. It was like dead silent. You could hear a lot. You could hear the broadcasters. We had, players give us a hard time because they could hear us on the field, which no one wants that. B, that just kind of shows you we're way high up and they can hear us. That's how quiet it would get. And, we like to make fun of, whether it's the Tampa Bay Rays and their lack of a home crowd or this team or that team, sports fans will make fun of, I think like the running jokes where the Oakland A's should be used to this. They don't get fans anyway, whatever. You realize that 5,000 fans, while it might not be a lot, it's a lot more than no fans. And I will say this, there's no traffic, no parking issues. There were some benefits, but I don't think that I would make that trade moving forward. It was a really weird experience, and it does take a lot of the life out of the broadcast and a lot of the enjoyment out of just being there, because I think we all love the atmosphere. The atmosphere is a big part of sporting events. It's why Legends games are way more exciting than most G League games, because in Frisco there's an atmosphere that is not matched in Greensboro, in Toronto, or Mississauga, wherever all these other G League teams play in these high school gyms. It's way different than when you go to the Comerica Center when you got 5,000 people who are making lots of noise, and the environment is a big part of the experience.
So we're talking to a group of business owners, leaders in their fields who have also had to do some pivoting during this time. You did some personally, and you started a podcast, kind of building your portfolio. What was your mindset in creating that?
Yeah, one, it was out of fear that if I didn't produce content, I'd get furloughed or fired or whatever. So it was a way to show, hey, I'm doing something. I'm not just using this as a vacation because I would normally be in the middle of baseball season. So born out of fear, for one, but I knew that I needed to do something, and so if I was going to do something, I didn't want to do something I wasn't going to enjoy. So, for a while, I've really enjoyed listening to some of these interview podcasts, long-form interviews, and I figured I may as well start it and do my own. And so it's been a lot of fun. I've been able to interview athletes, coaches. I've interviewed Malcolm, George Gallinopoulos, who was the Legends head coach last year, Al Whitley with the Legends, Jason Terry, who is no longer, I guess, with the Mavericks Legends, but was certainly around a lot. And then, I got to interview people like Chris Harrison of The Bachelor. I've never seen an episode of The Bachelor, but interviewed him, and I guess a lot of people are big fans of The Bachelor. And I got to interview a lady by the name of Tracy Walder, who was in the CIA during the mid-2000s and was one of the lead interrogators in the counterterrorism unit. And it's just, it wasn't confined to the sports world. It was just people who had an interesting story. I interviewed a young man who's blind who broadcasts basketball games. And, it was a fascinating story on how he goes about. He's got an undergrad degree, he's got a master's degree, he's working on his doctorate. I mean, just like a fascinating story. Interviewed people about all sorts of topics and subjects, and it's been, I don't know, for me, I don't know if, whether anyone listens to it or not, I love learning from people, and the ability to do so through this project has been incredibly enjoyable.
So are you going to go back and re-record Malcolm's introduction now and
I think
let
I need
everyone
to, right?
know
Yeah.
he's not Jason Terry?
I think I owe him one for sure. We've interviewed, 7 Hall of Famers, 26 All-Stars, but bear with me. We got Malcolm Farmer for the next 30 minutes.
So what is one tip you can give these business owners to kind of help them make that pivot in their own realm?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to act like I'm business savvy. I got a minor in entrepreneurship at USC. I didn't know what an entrepreneur was, though, when I signed up. I asked my advisor, I said, I don't know if this broadcasting thing's going to work out for me. I need to have some sort of a business background. What's something that I can do? What's like a discipline I could pursue that gives me just a general idea of various business disciplines? And they said, what about entrepreneurship? And I was like, all right, that sounds good. I trust you. I walked into class my first day, and they said the goal by the end of your time at USC is to have a money-making business started through the lessons of this class. I was like, oh, bad word. I don't know if this is right for me. So I don't know from a business sense. I've been able to observe. I think just for me, I love what I do. I think I believe in sports. There are a lot of sports fans, and I always tell people, if you want to be a broadcaster because you're a sports fan, run the other direction, because you miss out on more sports than you get to enjoy. During the season on Saturday nights, I'm in the office watching whatever big college football game is on up until the very last second, because I'm not going to be able to watch it during the game, or the NFL playoff games during January on Saturday nights. You just miss so much during the baseball season. You have games every day. I missed Dirk's final home game. Like, that was, I thought about long and hard asking off that game. Instead, I sent my wife to that game so that I could live vicariously through her. But you miss a lot. I believe, though, in the impact of sports, how sports can impact society. I'm sure that if you're a painter, you can impact a group of people. But just the reality is, sports has such a hold, such a reach, and I believe in that. And so I think that's what allows me to find my passion every day through the ups and downs of broadcasting. And it's not as glamorous as everyone probably thinks it is. And so I just try to do things I'm passionate about. And so I've had to make some switches. I've had to make some pivots. I don't know all the cool business lingo like space, and I'm going to lean in, and all the cool business terms. But I just think I've tried to always, I've been fortunate to do stuff I'm passionate about, and I found that I suck when it's something I don't really care about. Like, I have a really tough time over a period of time producing at a level I'd like if it's not something that I'm passionate about.
That's good advice. Good advice.
Is that the first time you've ever heard that? Be passionate.
Yes.
I'm sure I told you guys something
Yes.
very deep and profound
Brandon,
you've never heard before.
We're changing lives here.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about leadership style too. In your 6 years with the Rangers and also with the Legends, you've seen different leadership teams come in. You've seen a lot of different leadership styles. You've seen wins. You've seen losses. Tell us something, kind of a common thread in those teams that you've seen consistently winning.
Yeah, I think from I think there's 2 levels of this, right, with teams. There's the player side, because they do police themselves to a large degree. They're adults, and a lot of this falls on them. There's also the coaching side. I think, and I've been able to be close to basketball teams of the NBA level and the G League, Major League Baseball teams, minor league baseball teams, NFL teams, and when I was in Michigan, a minor league hockey team, and then college programs. And the X's and O's part that's important. You can't just take a great communicator and expect them to thrive in tough situations in which strategy is important. But I would say that the communication piece is the prevailing trait that is so important, because a lot of these, these are men and women, and they're not 7-year-old kids or 12-year-olds who, they're still, they're trying to figure out, their geometry homework in between basketball drills, and the teams, the coaches and the managers in baseball that have gone in the wrong direction are those who lost sight of how important the communication is. And the other thing is this, a major league manager gets paid a fraction of what his players make. And that just kind of frames who's going to win out when there's a conflict, right? Is the $20 million a year outfielder going to get kicked to the side of the street if he disagrees with the manager who makes $1 million a year? No. The manager doesn't sell jerseys. The manager doesn't hit home runs. He doesn't strike people out. He doesn't hit three-pointer. That's kind of the dynamic, right? So I think the communication, getting these guys, Ron Washington, for example, with the Rangers. You ask Michael Young, he was the guy in that clubhouse. Might not have been the best player, but was the leader. He'll tell you, hey, Wash would do things that would leave us scratching our heads, in game, strategy, making this decision, making that decision. But he'd also tell you that every single day they showed up to the ballpark, pumped to play for him, wanting to run through a brick wall for him. And that is so much more important than knowing that your manager's going to make the right pitching change, but not dreading like the interaction with him. And the other side of that is, it's always like a question, do you treat people equally or not? And I think the managers who realize that there are a few people in a clubhouse or a coach in a locker room who you got to connect with, because those are the go-betweens. Those are going to be the guys who are going to get your back. Those are going to be the guys who, when a disgruntled player or a player's disgruntled, they're going to go and say, no, we got to believe in his message. We got to believe in what he says.
So we've talked a lot about the people element of organizations, and I think that that's something that makes us so successful is our people, but I'm always interested to hear kind of the outsider's perspective on the legends. So you come in 24 nights a year on game nights. What is it that you kind of recognized about the organization? What keeps you coming back? And what do you see in our culture?
Well, I'm not getting paid to say any of this, so I'll just to show you I'm not getting paid to say this. When I first started, I walked out of the very first game I did. I filled in for a buddy of mine, and I was like, I don't know if I ever want to do this again. I thought the quality of basketball was really unenjoyable. It was 10 guys, 5 aside, who they were all trying to make the NBA with every possession, and if one of their teammates made a shot, they would be pissed that they weren't the ones making the shot. There was no team. It wasn't cohesive basketball. And then you got Byron driving around on like a 4-wheeler and people yelling and screaming the entire time, like, what the heck is going on? And then, first of all, the quality of basketball has gotten so much better. I think there have been some changes. The NBA's, continued buy into the league, and players realizing that just because they score 30 doesn't mean that they're getting a contract has played a big role. And I think that, credit to Bob McKinnon and George Gallinopoulos as well. I don't get to see every team. I know that Legends teams have been way more enjoyable to watch over the last few years. But then you realize when you show up, you got, how many people are on staff?
15. Okay,
there are 15 people on staff, I imagine, doing about 40 people's worth of jobs. Brittany and Kyle are the two people that I interact with most as far as like my job and my responsibilities, but it's tough to get a hold of them half the time because they're running around trying to help this person with that or that person with, it's just, so you appreciate and respect the hustle, and you realize as well, at the end of the day, this is minor league basketball. Now, the quality of play, the quality of the athlete is incredibly high. This is probably the second best basketball league in the world. But the work, the effort from the staff is not, well, people are going to come for the basketball, however many nights a year. we got to give this, this fan base a great reason to show up every night. And I love, I now, if you would have asked me after that first game, I wouldn't have given any tickets to friends or family to come. Now it's like I can't, that's one of the first things I do. Hey, my nephews, they come to I don't know how many games a year. They bug Brittany whenever they come, so she could probably tell you. Friends, family, whatever. I mean, it's such a great experience, but it's because when I show up at 3 o'clock, you don't have people that are just sitting there scratching their head looking at YouTube. You got people that are running around, including Malcolm, by the way, which I think is the most impressive thing. Someone with his level of responsibility and his level of command of the organization. I can't imagine there are many people with his title who are doing all the different things that he's doing throughout the day. And I don't know, I just think there's a level of appreciation for all of that, and seeing how the sausage is made hasn't turned me off to the legends in G League. It's only made me more committed and more appreciative of what goes on.
Thank goodness. Last question, hard-hitting journalism. This was texted in to me, so this is not my fault, but people want to know, what's the plan for your hair?
It's a good question. This is not a normal look for me, nor do I think it's a good look. When the pandemic hit, I didn't get a haircut or shave for like 3 months. My wife made me shave. Let's be real here. She makes the rules in the house. I'm not afraid to admit that. Any guy who doesn't admit that, you need to look in the mirror because you're probably lying. So the reality is, when I'm on TV, I very much have to care about my appearance. I was told by someone a couple years ago that I shouldn't shave. I should have a beard because I look 12 without a beard. I can't ever do this. And when the pandemic hit and I knew I wasn't going to be on camera for a while, it's like, hey, I got hair. Let's have some fun with it. And so I don't know when I'll get a haircut. I mean, I've gotten a few haircuts. I'm sure I'll go back to my normal short hairstyle by the time basketball season rolls around. But I have a lot of respect for, let's see, people with like a lot of hair. I don't know how you all deal with it, especially like women. My wife, I used to make fun of her for spending so much time getting her hair. I have whatever my length of hair is. It's a pain in the rear end just getting it to where like it looks respectable. And I've never used more, what do you call it, a mousse or gel over the first 30 years of my life than I have the last couple months. So I'm very much looking forward to waking up and not having to worry about my hair.
More things to look forward to.
Yes.
Haircuts. Well, Jared, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. We appreciate all you do for the team. Thank you.